Carol is here. My wife, also Jane, is here. Jack's grandson, Alec, and granddaughter-in-law, Rowan, are here. Lots of former students and colleagues from NK. So I will tell you a little bit about some of the backstory of Jack McMullen and let you fill in memories of Jack that you had as a colleague or teacher, etc. My dad was born on Halloween in Spencer, Iowa. And his parents must have had kind of a weird sense of humor, so they named him Jack for Jack-o'-lantern. And so he was born in Spencer on Halloween of 1930. You may remember that Spencer burned to the ground the next year after a fireworks accident, but he had nothing to do with that. His parents, Howard and Leafy McMullen, ran a small country store in a town about the size of Boland called May City, which was kind of by Spencer. And I've heard just a couple of stories about May City, Iowa. My dad had a dog, and the blacksmith in town had a dog of the same breed, but the blacksmith had bobbed his tail. And so when my dad would walk past the blacksmith shop, the blacksmith would yell out, "Jackie, bring your dog in here and I'll cut his tail off." My dad was always kind of afraid of this blacksmith because he was always threatening to cut his dog's tail off. And when my wife and I moved to Iowa City, my dad said, "I'd like to have you have this metal dustpan." And I said, "Why, Dad? I can get a dustpan at Kmart for $1.25. And he said, "This was made by the blacksmith in May City, and I want somebody to remember May City." Now, my dad was 4, I guess, when they moved from May City, but he was not baptized. And my grandmother, Grandma Mac, did not want him to be baptized as a Lutheran. There was a Lutheran church in May City, but for some reason, I don't know why, she waited until they moved to Burt, Iowa, which is over by Algona, and he was baptized along with his 2 little brothers when he was 4 or 5 years old in the Methodist church there. So my grandpa ran a store in Burt, Iowa as well, and as a kid growing up with his 2 little brothers, my dad and his brothers worked in the grocery store. They candled eggs. Do you have any old-timers know what candling eggs means? Yeah, tell the young folks here what you do when you candle eggs. Using candle as a verb is something that we don't hear much anymore. And he stacked shelves and delivered groceries, and he played basketball and baseball and with his brothers and marbles, and went fishing and hunting with his dad, and had kind of an all-American upbringing. During World War II, during rationing, it was hard on the grocery store because everything was in short supply and was all rationed. But in high school, when my dad got into high school, he enjoyed sports, and he also enjoyed girls, and he enjoyed one girl in particular, my mom, Jane, who had moved into Burt High School after going to a country school from 1st grade through 8th grade, back when country schools were still a thing. And so this new girl moved to town when she was a freshman in high school, and I guess on their first date, my dad and mom went roller skating in Titonka, and, pardon?
The whole school.
The whole school went, and so my dad kind of hung around with my mom, and they skated a little bit, and afterwards on the way home he said to my mom, "Are your hands cold?" And Jane said, "Why, yes." And my dad said, "Well, put them in your pockets." He was kind of that romantic guy, huh? So after high school, he didn't really know what he wanted to do. He went to Buena Vista College and studied business there for a couple of years, and then the Korean War broke out, and not really knowing what he wanted to do, and so he volunteered and joined the Air Force, and was in the Air Force for 2 years. He was a mechanic on propellers of B-29s and KC-57 aerial refueling airplanes. So he still has some tools, or there's some tools in his toolbox that I think that he walked off with from the Air Force with, that might have been used to change propellers on B-29s. In the Air Force, he went to, they deployed during the Korean War exactly the opposite way. Rather than going to Korea, he went to Morocco for some deployment, and also spent time in the Azores. And he has an S-shaped cribbage board that he bought at the PX in the Azores, which is one of the cribbage boards that I grew up playing cribbage with him. And he would always tell us, oh yeah, I got that in the Azores when I was in the Air Force. So when he was in the Air Force, after my mom graduated from Iowa State, they got married, and Mom was an Air Force wife for a couple of years, and Cheryl was born on an Air Force base in Salina, Kansas. And when he was in the Air Force, he had sort of this epiphany about what he wanted to do in life. He was in Tucson, Arizona at an air base, and they needed to organize a softball tournament for the airmen, some kind of like intramural tournament. And the person in charge said, I have no idea how to organize a softball tournament. And my dad said, I think I can do it. And he put it on and ran it. He got officials. He did the bracketing and all of the equipment and the lights. And he said, hey, this worked pretty well, and this was fun. This was something I could do. And so it was because of that Air Force softball tournament that he decided to go back to school when he got out of the Air Force. And he went to what's today UNI, what was then the Iowa State Teachers College in Cedar Falls, and finished his college degree in education to become a physical education teacher. And had me, Mom and Dad lived in a married student housing that was made out of corrugated sheet metal there for all of the veterans who were coming back to school at American colleges in those days. And my dad's first job after graduating from college was in the little town of Havelock, which is over by Pocahontas, kind of. And he coached everything, and he got the job because his wife also had a degree in home economics, and they really needed a home economics teacher. They kind of needed a physical education teacher, but he got the job because my mom could teach home ec, which she did for a year or so.
You had two babies.
You had two babies, so she didn't teach full-time, just taught home ec part-time. My dad, those of you that maybe played softball or saw him play softball on the Methodist softball team here when there was a church league, my dad liked to bunt. He always thought bunting was a good thing in baseball. And when he was a girls softball coach in Havelock, one time he had a girl bunt, and then he had the next 9 girls also bunt. The team they were playing just could not cover bunts at all, and so for 10 times in a row, the Havelock team bunted and kept going. So he tried to move to a school that had better facilities and more kids, and so in 1960 we moved from the little town of Havelock to the bigger town of Northwood. My mom and dad decided they rented a house on Central Avenue. The Porters lived there after we did a time or two, and that house is still there. Pardon?
It's nice now.
Yeah, it's been remodeled a little bit, there. So they built a house just 2 blocks down the way and moved down there in 1961. So Dad taught from 1960 until he retired in 1992. He was the athletic director. He worked for all those years at Northwood in an office without a window, which I didn't think about until I was bigger. I thought, but he didn't spend a lot of time there. He was out teaching physical education and driver's education and had a classroom. But his office, the athletic director's office, was there without a window. My dad was a really hard grader. For those that, took classes with him, for boys to get an A in physical education, there were, I think, 3 ways you could get an A. One was to climb the rope to the top of the gym, not using your legs, only using your arms, and that was hard. Another way was to do a kip, or whatever it's called actually, where you roll kind of on your back up to your shoulders and then spring up, not using your hands. Pep Hickman could do that. And the other way was there was a pegboard in the corner of the gym, and the patterns got increasingly complicated. And if you could do the pegboard on the most complicated, where you had to cross your hands to get to the top of the pegboard, you could get an A. So during high school, I was a 4-sport letterman. I was pretty athletic. I never got an A in physical education. My dad was a hard grader. He also taught many generations of students to drive, some with a stick shift, some with in winter when Northwood went to all summer, went to having physical education in the winter. He said it's really important for kids to learn how to drive on snowy roads because in Iowa, lots of accidents happen. So if you only learn to drive, you can take driver's education only in the summer, you're not getting the full benefit, the full education that you need. My dad was kind of gruff sometimes. He didn't have a paddle, but he did discipline kids when they needed it various ways. He also was he liked to play. When he retired in 1992, he enjoyed traveling with my mom. They came to visit us in various of our foreign service postings, spent more time with grandson Alec and his daughter Cheryl in Sioux City. When my mom and dad came to visit us, came to visit Jane and I on our first overseas assignment in the Dominican Republic, my dad was excited because a lot of Dominicans played baseball. But we also had, we went on Christmas Day to the beach. And I was surprised. My dad was all excited about being at the beach, not something that happened either at May City or Burt or Northwood very often. And I looked over, and here was my dad and mom on the beach. My dad had picked up my mom and was walking down the beach like sort of, I don't know, like Charles Atlas or something. Just, again, not the most romantic guy. And to pick up his wife on the beach and be walking down the beach was just struck me as interesting. Later, my mom and dad came to visit us in the Fiji Islands when we were living there, and we went up a really isolated river on bamboo rafts to a traditional village. And we had people, it was kind of like going to the Amana colonies or to an Amish community and this very traditional Fijian town. And as we were getting ready to go back, Dad wasn't there, and he was over. He had found sort of the village elder, some 85-year-old Fijian man, and was talking with him on his front step. Went out of his way to engage this old guy who had welcomed these visitors into their town. That was, I thought, kind of interesting that my dad would do that. Almost missed the raft back down river. Yeah, we enjoyed having them come visit. Dad and Mom were great visitors, and also host. They lived in the same place for all these years. From 1960, Mom still lives just down the block here. Teachers and preachers tend to move a lot, but I'm glad my parents stayed put, because as Jane and I were traveling all around the world, it was always fun to come back and visit Mom and Dad here in Northwood and see many of the faces who are here now. And my boys used to say, our sons used to say, I'd say, I'll go up to Fall Getters and get a gallon of milk. And Owen would say, oh, we'll see him in an hour, because he'll have to stop and talk to everybody he sees between here and Fall Getters. So it was nice that my dad stayed put in Northwood and worked for so long. I'll tell you, I'm wearing his hat today, this NK hat. And there's a story about this hat. My dad really liked baseball, and after he retired, he went down to see the Vikings play the Newman Knights in Mason City. And Dad was cheering for the for the NK Vikings, and next to him was a really drunk, belligerent Newman fan, and he was kind of challenging everybody to a fight who was cheering. And so he turned to my dad and saw this hat, and he says, NK, what does NK stand for? And my dad looked at him and said, Knights of Columbus. And the guy just got confused and sort of wandered away. I'm wearing that hat today. Now, I thought I'd end. My dad tried to remember Norwegian jokes, and every joke I heard growing up as a kid was a Norwegian joke. He enjoyed exchanging Norwegian jokes with Maynard Midgard and Lowell Gangstead and Dave Peterson and all of the Norwegian friends in town. So I thought I'd end with a joke, and this is on Oli and Lena's 30th anniversary. Lena went to a fortune teller. She went in and said, Swami, can you tell me my future? And the Swami said, well, unfortunately, you're going to have to prepare for widowhood because your husband will die soon. And she said, Swami, tell me, will I be acquitted? And on that low note, I think I'll hand the mic back to him.
that's a typical Jack joke. I've got one, actually, a friend of mine told me this joke here a couple weeks ago, and it just reminded me so much of Jack that I'll use Jack's name in it. This friend had taken this gentleman, he had to have a ride up to Mayo Clinic or someplace, and so they were riding, and Jack was really kind of quiet, didn't say much, and all of a sudden he says to her, he says, you know, there's a lot of Norwegians in northern Iowa. And my friend said, yeah? And then it was silence for a good 2 or 3 minutes, you know, just nothing. And then he says, there's a lot of mules in Missouri. Okay. And then it was up to like 5 minutes of silence. And then he says, Missouri had the first pick. Oh, isn't that a Jack joke? Okay, who else wants to talk about Jack?
Too many stories.
Too many stories.
Very connected. I hardly know where to start because I just live a short distance from Jack. And are you off? Oh, okay. We just live down the block from Jack, and there's too many stories to tell. Let's see what time it is. You all know me well, don't you? I'd like to ask you all a question. How many of you had Jack for phys ed?
Oh.
Okay. How many of you had Bob Perry for phys ed? Yeah. Okay, this is related to Richard. We had that swimming class, and it started, and I had it at the time, about 8 o'clock in the morning. And we did it up until about the 1st of October.
Right, yeah.
So you never heard so many stories about, do we have to go to the swimming pool today? It's too cold. That's one story that Richard's story would relate to as well. There's so many stories about Jack. Jack, Lowell, Maynard, and myself played cribbage for many, many years, enjoying each other's company, razzing each other constantly. Well, what stories can I tell? I can relate to one, if I could have that hat. I had a young man when I was a coach over in Nebraska. And by the way, Jack was one of my assistant coaches that played at the University of Nebraska, and he called one day, and I said, his name is not important, I guess, but anyway, he said, I got some tickets for you, Coach. You want to come over and watch us play against Iowa State? And I said, sure. And so I asked Jack and a few others, it's not important who was there, but we go into the old stadium, if you remember where that was, and the south end of the old stadium. And we were up high, and we filtered in there, and Jack comes in wearing this hat, and I know this is hard for you all to believe, but there were a whole bunch of inebriated Nebraska Cornhuskers sitting there. And as we walked by, one of these inebriated Nebraska fans grabbed Jack by the arm, and he said, "What's that NK stand for?" He said, Nebraska Cornhuskers, that's what it stands for. So there's another NK story for it. One of my favorites, or two of my favorite stories about Jack is Jack and a whole bunch of us would go fishing together to a variety of different places in Canada. And Maynard will relate to this. Jack always sat in the back of the boat facing away from the direction we were going. And there was one time that we got caught in a storm and you could hardly see over the waves. But Jack just sat there. The rest of us are worried about our lives, but Jack is just sitting there, not saying a word as he often did. And I tried to get all kinds of rises out of Jack. My last story, my favorite one, I think, is this, and I told this at Jack's funeral. Jack, Bud Craig and Brake and myself were in a pickup truck together. It was Bud's pickup truck. and Bud had a cabin up at Park Rapids, and we went there first. And Jack, as some of you may or may not know, wore a hearing aid, as did Bud. And so the three of us are sitting in the pickup truck, and Jack had a real polite way of not hearing people. He'd say, "What?" On the other hand, Bud, who wore the hearing aid as well, would say, "Beg your pardon, what did you say?" And I'm sitting in the back of this back seat of this pickup truck. And it's driving me crazy. I'm so infuriated with these two guys saying, "What? Beg your pardon?" On the way home, by the time we got back to Northwood, Bud had transferred his whole line, and instead of saying, "Beg your pardon," he said, just like Jack, "What?" It was a constant like that. One other thing I want to ask for all you former students of Jack McMullen, what was his nickname?
Happy Jack.
Happy Jack. Let's not forget that. Happy Jack. And one other quick one is Jack would always say to me, he said this a lot to me, "Bean soup." I say, "Jack, why don't you say what you're really thinking? Put it together."
I'd like to ask, well, my husband and I both had Jack for driver's ed. And anytime we parallel park, we always say, we'd make Jack proud. I have a couple of stories. The McMullens and the Perrys typically did supper at each other's house. We alternated every Sunday night. And there were two particular Sundays that were kind of interesting. One was when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan the first time. And Ron and Cheryl and I were sitting in the living room, very excited about the Beatles. And Jack was kind of looking on. He walks in the living room, and we're all pumped about the Beatles. And Jack goes, "Bunch of girls, get a haircut." And I like that story about Jack. The other one was when Mary Midgard Bloomingdale was born, Maynard passed out cigars. And Jack smoked cigars once in a while. And Mary's cigar sat in our junk drawer for many years. And it always bugged me when I opened the drawer and there was that cigar. So one day Jack and Dad were in the kitchen talking. I said, "I think I should smoke that cigar." And they said, okay. Now it had to be about 5 years old at this time. And so Jack said, "Well, if you're going to smoke that cigar, I got to teach you how." I'm like, okay. And he said, "Now, the rule of smoking cigars is you've got to suck in very hard." He said, "That's not hard enough." And we went through this 4 or 5 times, and finally he says, "Okay, you almost got it, but you gotta suck in even harder than you've done before." And so he takes me outside and he lights the cigar and he goes, "Okay, now suck in like harder than you've ever done it before." So I turned green. I did not lose my lunch, but it was pretty close. So Jack is also responsible for me never smoking again.
Anybody else?
I was going to say that you might all think, you haven't been there before, you'd say, "Well, Dennis Johnson must talk at every one of these." No, this is about the first time I've ever done it. but this happened to be something that Janelle and I talked about this a little bit coming into the cemetery walk today, that I actually had prepared a little bit of a spiel for his funeral. Okay, that had been, December, probably back a couple of years ago. And all of a sudden, Janelle's kind of looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and we just got done listening to Bob Perry and Maynard Midgard give their final farewells, and Janelle just, "Don't you dare go up there and say anything about Jack McMullen." It's getting long. And those guys did a good job, didn't they, Janelle? I mean, I thought they said it all, so it was good. But I did kind of prepare a couple things, about him, and it was kind of funny last night. We were at this social for our 50th class reunion last night. And one of the girls I'm talking to there was in driver's ed with me, and she was sitting in the back seat one day when this thing happened. And I didn't prompt her all last night, and she remembered the exact thing that happened that I'm going to tell you about. It happened right down their driveway here, just south of the cemetery here. And that would be that every time we play a little cat and mouse with Jack, and I was the one to kind of do it most of the time. I'm driving the car, and I always wanted to listen to WDGY radio station. It's a rock and roll station out of the Twin Cities. And of course, Jack always had what? KJLO radio on. So every time he'd come in the car, and I'd already switched it to that rock and roll station. And so he'd kind of push the button, he'd go back to KJLO, and he'd kind of give me a little hard time about it because he wanted to listen to Twins and whatever. And so the one day there, I thought, you know what, this will be kind of fun. I thought, I'm just going to set every station to WDGY. So he goes in the house to get something, comes back out, and he pushes the button and says, okay, Johnson, he did it again. Pushes the button, nothing. Pushes the button, WDGY, all up with that. And he goes, you rascal! You can just hear him saying it, But anyway, so a little prank there we kind of pulled on. But the guy was really passionate, a traditionalist, and I can tell you stories about a lot of things he did that way, but also very patient. And that was one example of patience right there. He really didn't get that mad, just kind of said that thing, and I kind of laughed a little bit, and that was kind of the end of it. But when it comes to enthusiasm, though, the guy was fired up. He always be kind of give it to you. And it was like our JV years of football. He was our head coach, and he had all us fresh sophomore guys. To get those guys fired up, he kind of got to be a motivator, and he did a very good job of that. And sure enough, our sophomore year, we just kind of beat everybody. And Britt, who's number one in the state of Iowa right now in football this year, we beat them 59-0. Okay, and so all of a sudden, Jack's kind of happy about this, and we're happy about this. And we said, you know what, Coach McMullen needs not Gatorade, he needs a shower. So all us sophomores and some freshman kids, we grabbed him and we pulled it, and he's like, hey, what are you guys doing? In the shower we go, and just gave him a good dousing there. So that was kind of a good memory there. But then he would actually drive the bus a lot of times to track meets too. I'll never forget this one, because he loved track meets. He was a really big track fan. And so we're going out to the track meet. I wasn't always the best. I tried to practice real hard in practice, but I ran this race. I was in a conference meet and did okay in it. But I get back to the bus, and Jack's the only person around the bus there. And you know what? Because I hadn't really got myself in too good a shape, I go back to the back of the bus, and I kind of lost it, And so I'm back there kind of losing my, and of course, then all of a sudden, Jack hollers back to me. He says, Johnson, are you back there losing your cookies? You just hear him saying that too. And I say, yeah, that'd be about right there, Jack. So talking about pegboard, I think I did make that. So I got the A that one year. That was kind of amazing. But so anyway, what else did he? Oh, okay. Then also when we kind of would go to track meets together, and this is one track meet that he started to ask me to come to. I really felt kind of honored that he'd kind of invite me, and he would get Drake relay tickets every year to go down to Drake relays. But then everything was just absolutely, and Jane can remember these things, we'd always park in the Methodist parking lot, long ways from the stadium, did that every time though, and then he'd always have peanuts with, and he'd always, at the end of the track meet, he'd just really, never missed it, you could count on it. Sure enough, he'd say, okay, the last race here now, it's going to probably, Baylor's going to win it, that's a team out of Texas, Waco, Texas, they'll probably win this thing, but I want everybody to kind of guess the time. And so we'd all had fun doing that, and there never wasn't any prize, by the way, but it was fun. And then Jack and I, the other place we kept in touch pretty well, I always enjoyed talking to him at Iowa State football games, because I would work in the student section as an usher. He'd come by and he'd hear my horror stories about students drinking too much alcohol, and I'm kind of throwing beer cans away and this and that, and he'd laugh about that, and we'd have a good time with that. And then Jane and Jack, every once in a while, would have a tree call or a lawn and garden call after I became an extension guy. And I'd come over there, and we didn't talk much about the trees. We didn't talk much about the yard. Many probably did with Jane. It was mostly having coffee and having a good time. And we just really totally enjoyed that, too. So a lot of good memories of Jack, and thank you.
I just want to share something about Jack too. He also shared a real passion for the outdoors, and which he helped foster in me as a child and as I grew up. And to the end of his days, he would save the conservation articles out of the Globe Gazette for me and pass them on to me at church on Sundays, and appreciated that personally. But one thing about Jack that I think is a life lesson for all of us is he would share his time. And even, for the shut-ins in town and whatever, he made the time to visit. When my dad was housebound, he'd come over and play a game of cribbage. And that's really a life lesson for all of us as we get older, is remember your time is one of the most precious things, and sharing it is certainly a lesson that Jack demonstrated in life.
Anyone else?
I'll just remember Pump Pump Pull Away. That was a game we always played in PE when we were like little kids, grade school.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know how it was even played. We divided and I can't remember the rules. We pulled each other away from the wall or something.
So how many of you had learned how to drive by Jack McMullen? That's quite a few of us, isn't it? Yeah. I remember trying to come up the swimming pool hill with a stick shift. Yeah. Yeah. Jane, did you have anything to share?
I just remember drivers having to stop, kill their engine, start again, and come on up the hill.
And that was actually a good lesson to learn, because that's something that's not always easily done. Also, my fondest memory of Jack is one Sunday after church, he comes up to me and he says, "Linda, you need to go to lay speaker class." And I said, "What? What do I want to go to lay speaker class for? Who would want me as a lay speaker?" He said, "I don't care, you're going to lay speaker class and I'll pay for it. A whole $10. And I've been a lay speaker ever since. I filled the pulpit at Zion Lutheran just last Sunday, so it has helped, and I think about Jack all the time for that. Anything else? Well, I want to thank you all for coming. I've got a lot of thank yous to make, and sometimes I forget. I thank Dennis for the microphone system and for the video. If you want a video, just let him know or let Lois Hogan know. There may be a small fee to get one, a copy of one, but no. They're generous, I guess. I want to thank the Anchor for doing so good on getting us publicity and getting it into the Anchor. It first showed up as 9:30, and I went up and talked to him and said, "Please put it in there that it's 9 o'clock," and he managed to get that changed quite a bit. I want to thank the cemetery crew for all the work they do. Like I said, this cemetery looks so nice. I heard somebody, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, said this isn't a cemetery, it's a park that has gravestones. You know, it's really nice. Trust me, I've seen pictures of cemeteries that are not anywhere near as nice as this. They're just not that well kept. And I'd like to thank Randy Brewer. He has been painting some of the flower pots around. If you see them, they're just gorgeous when they're all painted. They're the nice bright silver color that they are. And thank you to my committee. Lois, is there anybody else I need to thank? No. If you didn't sign our guest book, please make a trip over to Lois. She has it. We're trying to get everybody signed up so that we know how many people were here. And we're already making plans for next year. Lois is going to speak now. That's a first.
We are going to do Homer Doolittle, who's buried up there by the mausoleum. You'll notice there's a nice sign there. I came into the cemetery one day. I'm usually here quite often. I saw this sign, jumped out of my car and looked, and it said that he is the last Civil War veteran from Worth County who died. So there's a cemetery stone. The Sons of the Union Veterans put up a nice sign there. I put up a flag. The veteran came, put up a sign, and they didn't let me know. I wish they would have, so we could have had the Anchor write a story. But we will do him, and who else did we decide? We're discussing the other two, but we'll have.
Discuss with the families. We don't do it unless we have the family.
But we will do that one. So we hope you'll all come and enjoy that.
All right, if you've got suggestions, please let Lois know. And we will see you. Oh, make sure to stop uptown. There's lots of things going on. There's the car show and lots